Nicholas Alcamaide, a 21-year-old from Loughborough, England. He wasn't a pilot or an officer, but a flight sergeant, serving as a rear turret gunner in the Royal Air Force's Bomber Command. His role placed him in what was widely considered one of the most terrifying and psychologically taxing positions of the entire war. He was the eyes and the sting in the tail of a British Avro Lancaster bomber. The Lancaster was a masterpiece of wartime engineering, a colossal four-engine heavy bomber that formed the backbone of Britain's strategic bombing campaign. It was a giant of the skies, capable of carrying immense bomb loads deep into enemy territory. But for all its power and size, it was a death trap for the 7 men inside if caught by enemy fighters, and none were more exposed than the rear gunner. Nicknamed the tail end Charlie, Alcamaide's office was a cramped, perspex bubble at the very aft of the aircraft, isolated from the rest of the crew. He was bolted into place, his back to his comrades, staring into the vast, dark emptiness they had just flown through. It was his sole responsibility to protect the bomber's most vulnerable blind spot, the 6 o'clock position, from the deadliest threat it faced, the German night fighter. The mission on the night of March 23, 1944, was a familiar yet always perilous one, a night raid on Berlin. For the crew of Lancaster and D-784, this was just another operation in a long and grueling tour of duty. The skies over Nazi Germany were a hostile environment, a black canvas crisscross with searchlights, flak bursts, and the unseen menace of enemy aircraft lurking in the darkness. The air was lethally cold, both inside the unheated turret and out, and the constant roar of the engines was a deafening companion to the gnawing anxiety every man carried. They were flying into the heart of the enemy's defenses, and for Nicholas Alcamaide, curled up in his glass cage at the very back of the plane, the night was about to turn from routine into a personal hell. The first sign of trouble would have been a fleeting shadow, a shape darker than the night sky, closing in from below and behind. Or perhaps there was no warning at all, just a sudden, terrifying tracery of red lines streaking past his turret, the unmistakable tracer fire from a German Junkers Ju-88 night fighter. These hunters were specially designed for this grim purpose, to stalk the bomber streams, locate a target in the blackness, and strike with devastating speed. In an instant, the relative calm of the flight shattered. The world dissolved into a concussive roar of cannon and machine gun fire. The sound of impacting shells tearing through the Lancaster's aluminum skin would have been deafening, a violent ripping and pounding that shook the entire aircraft. For Nicholas Alcamaide, the attack was intensely personal. The rear turret was the primary target. The German pilot's aim was true, and a storm of high explosive and incendiary rounds slammed into the bomber's rear fuselage. The effect was catastrophic. The Lancaster, moments before a graceful giant, was now mortally wounded. A fuel tank in the wing was punctured and ignited, sending a torrent of fire streaming back along the fuselage, enveloping the tail section. The interior of the aircraft, once a dark and cramped haven, was now illuminated by the hellish, flickering glow of an intense fire. The acrid smell of burning fuel, cordite, and melting metal would have filled the air, a suffocating cocktail that signaled the death knell for the aircraft. Inside his perspex bubble, Alcamaide's situation deteriorated from critical to impossible. The electrical lines were severed, plunging his turret into darkness, its power and intercom connection gone. He was now completely cut off from the rest of the crew, alone in a dying machine. The hydraulics that allowed him to rotate the turret were destroyed, jamming him in position. He was trapped. The fire, fed by the aviation fuel, began to consume the aircraft structure around him. The perspex of his canopy started to blister and melt from the intense heat. He could feel the searing temperature on his skin, and the flames were literally licking at his flight boots. This was no longer an aircraft. It was a coffin, and it was beginning to cremate him alive. It was in this inferno that Nicholas Alcamaide was faced with a choice no human being should ever have to make. He knew the order to bail out must have been given, but he never heard it. He knew his duty was to escape, but he was imprisoned in a cage of his own making, a cage that was now melting around him. His training and instinct screamed at him to grab his parachute. It was standard procedure for rear gunners to keep their chute in the turret with them, as donning it in the narrow fuselage was difficult. He turned, reaching for it, and the reality of a predicament crystallized into absolute horror. His parachute, stored in its rack on the turret wall, was on fire. The canvas pack was smoldering, the delicate silk inside already beginning to catch, rendered completely useless. In that single, soul-crushing moment, every conventional hope of survival vanished. The calculus of his existence was reduced to two unbearably grim equations. On one hand, a certain and agonizing death by fire. He could remain in the turret for perhaps another 30 seconds before he was either incinerated or the aircraft structure collapsed, plunging him into the inferno anyway. It would be a slow, conscious, and excruciating end. On the other hand, there was the jump, a leap from 18,000 feet into black, freezing void without a parachute promised a different kind of death, but in his mind, a far more preferable one. It would be quick. The long fall would grant him a minute or two of consciousness, perhaps even a strange, peaceful silence after the roaring hell he was in, followed by an instant, obliterating end on impact. He would be choosing the manner of his death, exerting one final shred of control over a situation that had spiraled into utter chaos. He would deny the flames their victim. With a clarity born of absolute desperation, Nicholas Alcemade made his decision. He reached down, manually cranked the turret doors open against the searing metal, and without a second thought, threw himself backward into the night. The transition from the roaring, fiery inferno to the silent, frigid blackness was instantaneous and absolute. One moment, Nicholas Alcemade was surrounded by the overwhelming sensory assault of a dying aircraft, the deafening roar of the flames, the searing heat on his skin, the choking smell of destruction. The next, he was tumbling through a void. The first sensation was a shocking, brutal cold that bit through his flight suit, a stark contrast to the oven he had just escaped. There was no sound but the rush of wind past his body, a noise that quickly faded from a scream to a whisper as he fell away from the chaos above. He was disoriented, spinning in the dark, a lone speck ejected into an endless night sky. As his body stabilized, the true surrealism of his situation set in. He was, against all odds, still alive and acutely conscious. He looked up and saw the most haunting and beautiful sight he would ever witness. The burning wreckage of his Lancaster bomber, now a distant, twisting constellation of orange and yellow against the black, slowly drifting away from him and upwards, or so it seemed. It was a funeral pyre ascending into the heavens, leaving him behind in the silence. He described a profound sense of peace descending upon him, an acceptance of his fate that washed away the terror of the previous minutes. There was no fear of the end, only a serene detachment. He watched the world, a vast, dark expanse below, offering no clue of its approaching surface. He recalled passing through a cold, damp bank of cloud, a final, soft blanket before the end. It was in this state of otherworldly calm that he eventually and mercifully lost consciousness, his body and mind surrendering to the inevitable. The science of his survival begins with a fundamental principle of physics, terminal velocity. A human body in free fall, unlike a rock dropped from a great height, does not accelerate indefinitely. As gravity pulls the body downward, air resistance pushes back with increasing force. After falling for about 1,500 feet, these two forces balance out, and the falling object ceases to accelerate, continuing its descent at a constant maximum speed. For a human body in a stable, spread-eagle position, this speed is roughly 120 miles per hour. But in the dense, cold air at high altitude, and likely tumbling or in a less-than-ideal position, Alcemade probably reached a terminal velocity closer to 100 or 110 miles per hour, while still a fatal impact speed on most surfaces. This velocity was a critical factor. He was not hitting the ground at hundreds of miles per hour, but at a speed where the properties of what he hit could make all the difference. His unconscious, limp body likely stabilized itself, minimizing air resistance and ensuring he didn't tumble erratically, which could have proven fatal before he even landed. The next thing Nicholas Alcemade knew was not an afterlife, but a violent, cacophonous awakening. He was jolted back to consciousness by a series of sharp, cracking sounds and sensation of being whipped and battered from all sides. He was crashing through the upper branches of a dense forest of young fir trees. He had fallen directly through the canopy. This was the second and most crucial miracle of his fall. The German forest he plummeted into was not comprised of old, sturdy giants, but of flexible, young pine trees. Their branches were strong enough to slow him, but supple enough to bend and snap, each one sapping a little more of his tremendous kinetic energy. Furthermore, the ground was not bare earth, but covered in a deep, soft layer of accumulated winter snow, which acted as a final, forgiving cushion. The successive breaking of branches acted like a natural, progressive shock absorber, a series of millions of small, breaking collisions instead of one single, catastrophic impact. The final few feet were likely a tumbling, rolling motion as he dropped from the lowest branches onto the snow-covered forest floor. The impact was undoubtedly violent. He suffered significant injuries, including a severe sprained leg and numerous lacerations, but was not the instantly obliterating force he had prepared for. He had fallen over 3 miles without a parachute, and through a combination of physics, a forgiving force, and sheer, unimaginable luck, he had cheated death itself. He lay in the darkness, surrounded by the scent of shattered pine and damp earth, alive, and utterly alone with the staggering reality of his own survival. Lying in the deep snow and shattered debris of the pine branches, Nicholas Alcemade drifted back into a world of sensation. It was not the nothingness he had expected, but a chorus of pain. A sharp, throbbing agony shot through his leg, later diagnosed as a severe sprain. His body was a canvas of cuts and bruises from a violent passage through the trees, and the burns on his hands and face from the cockpit fire stung in the cold night air. For a long moment, he simply lay there, trying to process the impossible. He moved a hand, then an arm, confirming the physical reality of his body. He was not dead. The silence of the German forest was profound, broken only by the wind in the trees above and the distant, fading drone of the bomber stream. The burning wreckage of his Lancaster was nowhere to be seen. It had crashed some distance away. He was alone, injured, but astonishingly miraculously alive. His mind, struggling to reconcile with this new reality, grasped for a simple, tangible proof of life. With fumbling hands, he reached for the pocket of his flight suit and retrieved his cigarette case and matches. The simple, mundane act of striking a match became a profound ritual. In the small flare of light, he saw his own hands, dirty and injured. He lit the cigarette, drew the smoke into his lungs, and felt its familiar, comforting burn. This was no celestial realm. This was the cold, hard, and wonderful reality of Earth. He was here. He had smoked a cigarette down to the end, a quiet, personal celebration of existence he had already said goodbye to. His solitude was short-lived. The crashing descent and the scattered wreckage of his plane had not gone unnoticed. He was soon discovered by German civilians, who, upon finding this injured Allied airman, promptly alerted the local authorities. He was taken into custody, first by the German Home Guard, and then handed over to the much more formidable Gestapo for interrogation. It was in the stark, intimidating interrogation room that Nicholas Alcemade's incredible story faced its greatest skepticism. When he calmly explained the circumstances of his bailout to his German captors, he was met not with awe, but with cold, hardened disbelief. To them, his account was not a miracle. It was a poorly constructed lie. The idea that a man could fall from 18,000 feet without a parachute and survive was a physical impossibility, a fantasy. Their conclusion was logical from their perspective. This man was not a genuine downed airman, but a spy. He had, they accused, hidden his parachute before being captured to facilitate his insertion into the German populace. The mood in the room turned dangerous. The Gestapo officers were experts at detecting deception, and Alcemade's steadfast insistence on his story was, to them, the bravado of a trained agent. They pressed him, demanding the truth and the location of his hidden parachute, their suspicion growing with every moment he stuck to his impossible tale. Faced with their escalating accusations and the very real threat of being executed as a spy, Alcemade realized that his only hope lay not in persuasion, but in physical evidence. He knew his story was true, and he knew the proof was out there in the forest. With a calmness that must have seemed either foolish or incredibly confident to his interrogators, he issued a challenge. He told them they could verify his story. He described exactly where his parachute would be, not hidden in a barn or a ditch, but still inside the mangled, burned-out wreckage of the rear turret of his Lancaster bomber. He urged them to find the crash site and look for the remains of the parachute pack in its storage rack. The Germans, likely intrigued by a specific and audacious claim, decided to take him up on it. A search party was dispatched to locate the main wreckage of the bomber. There, amidst the scorched and twisted metal of the tail section, they found it. Just as Alchemade had said, the metal frame of the parachute storage rack was still intact, and within it lay the charred and melted remains of his parachute, the canvas and silk almost entirely consumed by fire, its harness fused to the metal by the intense heat. It was irrefutable evidence. The Germans had the proof they needed, and it completely corroborated the Englishman's unbelievable story. The irrefutable evidence of his burned parachute transformed Nicholas Alchemade's status entirely. He was no longer a suspected spy, but a living marvel. So impressed were his German captors by the veracity and sheer improbability of his survival that they did something extraordinary for a prisoner of war. They provided him with an official, signed certificate. This document attested the facts of his case, confirming that he had indeed jumped without a parachute from 18,000 feet and survived, a gesture meant to protect him from any further suspicion as he moved through the POW system. He was transferred to the Stalag Luft III prisoner of war camp, where his story spread among the other Allied prisoners, becoming a legendary tale of hope and defiance. After the war, he returned to Britain, and his story, once a secret whispered in a POW camp, broke in the newspapers. He was suddenly a celebrity, the man who had cheated death in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. He was interviewed, his story was published, and he became a permanent part of RAF Bomber Command lore, a symbol of the incredible will to live that defined so many who served. The question that everyone asked then and now is how? How did he survive an impact that should have been instantly fatal? The answer lies in a perfect one-in-a-billion confluence of factors that aligned in those few seconds before impact. The primary element was without a doubt the German pine forest. He did not hit solid ground. Instead, he impacted a complex, layered natural system designed to absorb energy. The young, flexible fir trees acted like a series of sequential breaks. Each branch he struck on the way down had a snap, and each one, that snap consumed a fraction of his immense kinetic energy. This process of progressive slowing, rather than a single, sudden stop, was a fundamental key. The deep, soft snow on the ground then acted as a final cushion, further dissipating the remaining force of the fall. It was the ultimate natural safety net. Further scientific analysis suggests other crucial factors. While he was unconscious and tumbling for much of the fall, it is highly probable that his body naturally stabilized into a feet-first position as he neared the ground, the most aerodynamic posture for a human body. This meant that the force of the impact was distributed vertically along the strong bones of his legs, pelvis, and spine, which are designed to handle compression, rather than sideways or head first, which would have been immediately fatal. Furthermore, his loss of consciousness, a terrifying prospect in most situations, may have been a blessing in disguise. Because he was limp and completely relaxed upon impact, his muscles did not tense up. A tense body is a rigid one, more prone to broken bones and traumatic internal injuries. His unconscious, flaccid state allowed his body to be more pliable, to roll and absorb the impact in a way a braced, conscious body could not. To understand just how rare Alchemade's survival was, we can look at other famed cases. Perhaps the most famous is Vesna Vulovic, a Serbian flight attendant who survived a fall from 33,000 feet after a mid-air explosion in 1972. Her survival is often cited as the highest fall without a parachute, but her case was different. She was pinned inside a large section of the aircraft's fuselage, which acted as a crude wreckage sled that crashed into a snow-covered, heavily wooded mountainside. In contrast, Nicholas Alchemade fell free of his aircraft, with no substantial structure to protect him. His survival relied solely on the precise properties of the trees and snow that broke his fall. This distinction makes his story, in many ways, even more remarkable. It stands as one of the purest and most extraordinary instances of human survival against impossible odds, a testament not just to luck, but to the unforgiving, yet occasionally merciful, laws of physics. Nicholas Alchemade's story is far more than a simple anecdote of incredible luck. It is a profound lesson in human resilience. It is the story of a split-second decision made in the face of two certain horrific deaths, a choice to seize control over the manner of one's own end. In doing so, he stumbled into a miracle, His survival stands as a powerful testament to the unyielding human will to live, even when all hope is logically extinguished, securing his place in history with one of the most miraculous survivals in the entire history of aviation. His journey forces us to wonder what we are truly capable of when pushed beyond all conceivable limits. It's a reminder that sometimes, against all odds and all reason, the impossible can happen. We want to hear from you. What is the most amazing survival story you've ever come across? Share it in the comments below. We're always looking for more incredible tales of the human spirit. If you were captivated by the story of Nicholas Alcamade's 3-mile fall, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories from history's edge. There are plenty more tales of courage, disaster, and miraculous escapes waiting for you.